Chapter 4. Slave auctions have become more common in the past decade. At first, only the truly shameless would publicly admit to owning slaves, and only augments were truly shameless. Only increasing their fitness seemed to matter. Even the demon worshippers had standards. Of course, demon worshipper standards meant they tried to avoid any form of honest business. They carefully arranged to murder, manipulate, and steal what they wanted. As times grew more desperate, even men who were once honest felt they could not compete if they continued to pay employees. Though there was effort among them to treat slaves with dignity, deep down they knew that there was no dignity in being property. It was particularly unfortunate to see women being sold. Publicly, they were advertised as having cooking and cleaning skills, but even ugly, deformed, and elderly women were used to slake the lust of those that won the auctions in which they were sold. The harshness of this reality and the unspoken understanding of those that participated in the auction that day undoubtedly caused the gasping and murmuring when she walked out in shackles. Even those that could afford the higher-end auctions with the healthier slaves had never seen anyone like her. Her golden hair shined even in the dull sky. She wore a simple white dress. Only the most elderly women had dresses typically, but she was quite young, possibly 20 years old. Not only that, but she looked healthy, as if she had been eating multiple times daily on a regular basis. She was slender, but not the typical sickly and overly thin kind. She had a very feminine figure. The men could not help but stare in awe at her beauty and wonder what fortune had led them to participate in this particular auction. She seemed quite confused as the masked auctioneer stood up on stage next to her. They kept going on about her cooking and cleaning skills. She wondered why they said that, since she had no memory of cooking or cleaning. In fact, she had very little memory of anything. She remembered she had needed to get somewhere or help someone, but she had been too slow. When the masked men found her and chained her, they asked her why she kept saying she was too slow. The answer to their question seemed so close, but just beyond her ability to recall it. She had felt as if she had just woken from a dream and could not recall it. "We detected no augmentations at all," said one of the masked men to the eager crowd. "What you see is what you get. We have never had a specimen as fine as this in any auction, ever," said the other. "The bidding will start at 1,000,000 credits. There were only a handful of men that were millionaires in attendance. Every one of them raised their hands immediately. The masked men chuckled with greedy delight. The rickety stage they hauled up creaked as they moved on it. The top of this hill was not as low profile as some of the bidders had wanted, but it was perfect for hiding their cart with their other slaves. The masked men were eager to get money for the beautiful woman, since they feared having to protect such a valuable person. Credit drives were far easier to keep safe. 2,000,000? asked the other. Only a couple hands dropped. 3,000,000? asked the one. All but 3 hands fell. 5,000,000, shouted one of the bidders enthusiastically. 7,000,000, shouted another. 10,000,000, shouted the first. It seemed it was down to the 2 of them. 11,000,000, shouted the other. 11,500,000, shouted the first. His voice was becoming desperate. He was at his limit. The other man smiled. 12,000,000, he shouted as he stared with wide eyes at the woman on the makeshift stage. What would you say to 50,000,000? shouted a tall man in the back using air quotes. Everyone whirled around in shock at such a high number. No one recognized him. "I would say I need to verify the funds of anyone using air quotes when they specify an amount," said one of the masked men cautiously. "Yeah," said the tall man. "I guess that would be smart," he said with air quotes. "What's with the air quotes?" asked the other man. "It makes us all uncomfortable," he added with air quotes of his own. Murmurs of agreement echoed through the men at the auction. "Oh, come on," shouted the tall man angrily. "It's okay if he does it, but not me?" he asked, again using air quotes. The tall man slowly stepped forward, revealing himself as Lizard. "Then again," said Lizard in a low voice, "you should all feel uncomfortable in this business," he said with air quotes. Lizard scurried with amazing speed up to the stage. "Be careful," whispered the woman. "They have—" "Guards!" shouted the masked men in unison. A pair of cloaked troops stormed out, pointing their rifles at Lizard. "We would like to apologize for the mess that our serious bidders are about to witness," said one of the masked men. "Yes, gentlemen," added the other, "please do not let a bit of unpleasantness dissuade you from further participation." The first masked man turned to the guards. "Kill him," he said. The guards immediately pointed their guns at the chains binding the woman and blasted her free. She jumped back in shock and amazement, unsure of what to do next. Lizard scooped her up. "Don't worry," said Lizard with a smile. "I'll get you out of here quickly." He scurried away before anyone could stop him. The guards pulled the hoods back on their cloaks, revealing themselves as Victor and Sig. "I love what we do," said Sig with a laugh. Victor looked uneasy as he saw the large number of bidders that were unhappy that the most beautiful woman they had ever seen was taken from them. In a moment, dozens of rifles and handguns were cocked and pointed at them. Sig was still smiling widely, but Victor shifted with uneasiness. "I'd love it with fewer gun barrels pointed at us," murmured Victor. "You will never escape alive," said one of the masked men. "Never is such a broad, sweeping word," said Sig, as if the word choice of the men threatening their lives was the most important thing. Sweat beaded up on Victor's forehead as he glanced at the crowd of angry bidders. Most of them were covered in dark cloaks to hide their identities. Suddenly, two of the cloaked figures in the middle of the bidders threw off their cloaks and began swinging katanas and cutting through the unprepared auction patrons with speed and accuracy. Of course, in so doing, they revealed their own identities, Jonathan and Kirana. Seizing the opportunity, Sig used the butt of his gun to strike both of the masked men, breaking their masks to pieces. In a few short minutes, the surviving bidders fled the outdoor auction. Victor, who was greatly relieved that their plan had worked so well, dragged the auctioneers to the back of their stage. "Lucas," shouted Victor cheerfully, "we've found a pair of gentlemen who would like to fund our abolition efforts." Daniel emerged from behind the hill on which the auction had been held and scowled at Victor. "You've become just like the others," said Daniel with disappointment. "Try to treat others with more respect. Life is a precious thing, you know." "And we made it through this without losing ours, Doctor," replied Victor defensively. "It is right to be happy with success. Besides, you know what would have happened to that woman." Daniel lowered his head, conceding Victor's point. He rushed toward the bidders to see if he could help anyone that had survived Jonathan and Kirana's surprise attack. Lucas got out a computer while Sig and Victor held the auctioneers. "Your credit drives, gentlemen?" said Lucas politely. "We don't have them on us," whimpered one of the auctioneers. "That's going to be a problem," said Lucas calmly. "I don't know if you saw how handy our friends were with their blades." The two men began sweating as they looked back to see Kirana pull one of her swords out of the body of one of the slavers. She stared coldly at the auctioneers, then down at her stained blades. "I certainly don't want to be the one to tell them that your funds are unavailable," continued Lucas. "Perhaps it would be better to have you explain that." "Hang on," stammered one of the men. "I'm sure we can come to an understanding without involving them." "I would prefer that," said Lucas calmly. There's a cart we carried our slaves and stage in," said the other of them. "It's just a short ways north." Sig grabbed the collar of the man he was holding. "Show us," Sig whispered as he pulled out his long knife and put it up to the auctioneer's throat. The auctioneer's face went pale, and sweat dripped off of his brow. Finally he began pointing the way. Sig turned him around and marched him in that direction. Lucas, Victor, and the other auctioneer followed. Sure enough, the bottom of the dusty hill and a large amount of sagebrush concealed the cart in which several slaves were still imprisoned. Sig blasted the lock to the gate. The starved men looked with wide eyes at their liberators. "There's an elderly man up the hill," said Victor. "He will see to your injuries and can provide some food." The word food made the eyes of these slaves light up, and they darted up the hill. "Where are your credit drives?" asked Lucas calmly. "There's a chest under the floorboards at the front of the cart," said one of the auctioneers nervously. "How do we know it isn't a trap?" whispered Sig, as he grabbed the arms of the auctioneer nearest him. "It's okay, Sig," said Lucas. He pulled the divine key of origins out from under his shirt. The sight of the key drew a gasp from the auctioneer that Victor held at gunpoint. After a moment, Lucas put the key back under his shirt. "No traps," said Lucas calmly. He went to the front of the cart and pulled up the floorboards. From underneath, he pulled out a small black box. He opened it up and gasped himself. "What is it?" asked Victor impatiently. "The drives are there, aren't they?" "Yes," said Lucas hesitantly. "But this was also here." Lucas pulled out a chain with another shining, mirrored key. "I thought you said the next one was still some distance away," said Sig. "It still is," said Lucas. "This isn't supposed to be here. I don't even know which it is." "Never mind, we will get the credits first." Lucas plugged the drives into his computer. "Authorize the transactions," said Lucas calmly. Victor and Sig pushed the auctioneers toward Lucas. As the auctioneers' fingers touched their drives, they lit up. After a moment, the glow ceased, and Sig and Victor pulled them back. "Where did you get that key?" shouted Sig at the auctioneer he was holding. The woman you stole," stammered the auctioneer. "She was wearing it, but it doesn't do anything. It's not real." Sig pulled out a pistol, cocked it, and pointed at the auctioneer's head angrily. This was more than the auctioneer could handle, and he passed out and slumped onto the dusty ground. After a moment, a large dark spot began to appear on the fainted auctioneer's pants. Sig stepped back and pointed his gun at the other auctioneer. "Awkward," said Lucas. "Don't think I won't make you pee yourself," said Sig as he approached the other slaver. "We just thought we could sell it to some religious people," confirmed the auctioneer. "It's a fake." "Where did you find the woman?" asked Victor. "She was just by the old shrine to the west a couple days ago," he replied. We couldn't help." "Yeah, I know what you intended to do," said Victor angrily. "Please don't kill me," said the auctioneer nervously, "and don't make me pee my pants either." "What made you think that was okay to say?" asked Lucas in a disgusted voice. Suddenly Jonathan began shouting from the hilltop. "Lizard's back with the girl," shouted Jonathan enthusiastically. "She seems unhurt." "Great news, Jonathan," shouted Sig. He turned to the auctioneer and smiled. "That really is good news. I feel a lot better." The genuine happiness that Sig exuded with his statement must have been contagious, since the auctioneer smiled as if he was also pleased with the result. Victor and Lucas laughed softly. Suddenly Sig punched the auctioneer in the face, knocking him out cold. "Let's go," said Sig, who was still smiling. After a moment he burst out laughing. "That was great. I seriously love what we do." "Is he always like this?" whispered Victor to Lucas. Lucas nodded with a smile. Up at the top of the hill, Lizard and Daniel were helping her sit down on the makeshift stage. Jonathan looked back and forth between Kirana and the woman, as if trying to decide with whom he stood the best odds of romance. Kirana frowned at the woman and appeared to be relieved when Sig, Victor, and Lucas reached the top. Daniel rubbed an ointment on the wrists of the woman where the chains were fastened. She breathed a sigh of relief. No one wanted to interrupt the doctor while he had a patient. "My dear," he said kindly, "are you hungry? Did they feed you?" The woman smiled shyly. "I haven't done anything to deserve your kindness," she said softly. "What a terrible thing to say," said Daniel with a frown. "What?" asked the woman, worried she had somehow offended her benefactors. That you should have to do something in order to deserve kindness, said Daniel. Lizard rolled his eyes. Here we go, said Lizard. The woman smiled. Lizard, said Daniel angrily, you don't have to take that tone, and lay off the air quotes. I'm not taking a tone, said Lizard with air quotes. I've just heard your speech enough that I have it memorized. Unlikely, shouted Daniel, and rude, the antithesis of what we should be after what this poor girl has been through, having to be on an auction block. I can't even imagine. The doctor turned to the woman again. Now what was I saying? Started the doctor. Lizard quickly snuck behind him so that he was still visible. He mouthed the words that Daniel used as he spoke, while heavily using air quotes. Oh yes, every life is precious. Everyone has a purpose. You do not have to do anything to deserve. Daniel turned, noticing Lizard doing his air quotes behind him, and scowled. The woman giggled. Daniel frowned. Fine, said Daniel as he walked away. Thanks for getting her out quickly, Lizard, said Sig with a grin. Quickly would have meant I wouldn't have needed backup, said Lizard with air quotes. Wait, you can go quicker than that? Asked the woman. Yes, said Lizard with air quotes. Wait, does that mean you're being sarcastic? If I was being sarcastic, said Lizard with air quotes, you would not have to ask. Oh, so it was sarcasm, asked the woman, confused. I'm sorry, I'm slow at picking up on things. I'm too slow. The word slow seemed to trigger some sensation of guilt, but she could not remember why. Don't let Lizard do that, said Sig. He can make you dizzy. Oh, sorry, said the woman. You don't have to apologize, said Sig with a smile. I take it Daniel introduced himself? Asked Victor, changing the subject. Yes, said the woman, clearly grateful for the change in subject. And I also met Lizard. My name is Victor Lee, said Victor. I'm also a newcomer. She smiled as she looked at Victor. There was something familiar about him that made her feel comfortable. Victor began pointing people out. That's Sig, Lucas, Jonathan, and Kirana. I'm pleased to meet you all, said the woman. I'm Jennifer Cedar. Lucas pulled out the key from the box. We found your divine key, said Lucas. She looked at it and smiled. Thank you, she replied. I thought I had lost it. Lucas handed it to her. The moment her hand touched it, it glowed with a short, bright light. That's odd, said Lucas. I thought that only happened the first time a guardian touched it. You have a divine key, Lucas? Asked Jennifer. He nodded. Yes, the divine key of origins, he replied. Which one is yours? I don't know, replied Jennifer. Lucas coughed in surprise and shock. How could you not know? He said at last. I don't know that either, she replied. Sorry. Don't you feel something when you hold it? Asked Lucas. She gripped her key and closed her eyes for a moment. Hungry, she said at last. Where were you before the slavers captured you? Asked Victor with a smile. I don't remember that either, she said. Daniel came back carrying a small computer. She has traces of tetraparathephanine in her system, said Daniel. Speak so we can understand you, Doctor, said Sig. It's actually quite rare, explained Daniel, but its primary use is for slaves. It makes memories inaccessible to reduce resistance and facilitate quicker training. Doctor, said Sig with a serious expression on his face, I can't understand that either. It's okay, said Victor. I understood. She can't remember anything. Yet she remembered she owned a divine key, observed Lucas. Am I making things difficult again? Asked Jennifer. Is it because I came late? I'm always late. Why would you think you're late? Asked Kirana, who was slightly annoyed by Jennifer's ignorance. Bad things happen when I'm late, said Jennifer sadly. The word late seemed to echo in her head as it left her lips, It felt to her as if she was supposed to remember something. She looked back up and images began swirling. She wondered if she was having a reaction to the drugs with which the auctioneers had injected her. She blinked rapidly, hoping stability would return. "Jennifer?" asked Victor as he noticed the glazed look in her eyes. She began to fall. He rushed and caught her before her head fell on the hard stage. Jennifer's vision became clear again, but she immediately realized she was dreaming. The clear blue sky overhead and the green grass on which she walked soothed her. She breathed deeply, determined to enjoy this fantasy for as long as it would help her escape the harsh reality where the world had been scarred. She hated dealing with reality. Suddenly she saw something that shook her. It was herself. She was wearing the same dress, but her face was covered in fear. She frowned as she concluded that there would be no relief even in the safety of unconsciousness. She ran after herself and even called out her name, but it seemed that she was invisible in this world. After running some distance, she and her other self came to a heap of rust and ash. It looked familiar to her. Her other self gasped in horror and disbelief. Suddenly a man came up next to her and startled her. Her other self seemed to expect the man's presence, though. He carried a shotgun and wore a long white cloak. He was tall and had large, muscular arms. He almost reminded her of Sig, except he was far more solemn. There were no smiles on this man. "Jennifer, you're late," said the man. "I'm not that late, am I, Drew?" her other self asked. "Don't play dumb," said Drew angrily. "I'm not playing dumb," insisted her other self, "which means I should feel insulted by that, right?" "You're impossible, Jennifer," said Drew as he shook his head. "Tell me, did you find out where this monster came from?" "No," said her other self. "Well, we can't wait," said Drew in a determined voice. "He's killing people. The sleeping sickness is nothing compared to what he's doing." "I can't help it," said her other self. "No one knew about this creature. Hang on. Why am I late? What are you going to do?" "I'm going to make him stop," said Drew. He looked at Jennifer's other self. "And if I can't make him stop, it will be up to you to find a way." His voice was low and firm. As Jennifer watched the eyes of her other self grow wide with worry, she felt something awful knot up in her stomach. "Wait," said her other self. "He already killed Timothy. Let me go and check some more. I will find an answer. I just need more time." "You have all the time in the world, Jennifer," said Drew with a hint of a smile. "And if self-preservation gives me pause, then I do not deserve my heavenly shield." Drew pulled a chain with a mirrored key from beneath his tunic. The ground shook in the distance. All three of them whirled toward the source. "That's him," said Drew. He rushed toward the sound. "Drew!" shouted Jennifer and her other self in unison. "Don't go! Give me more time!" "More time?" came a voice from behind her. Jennifer spun around. Suddenly she felt herself sitting up. Daniel Young was sitting next to her. "Do you remember something more?" She had woken up from her dream. The soft green grass had been replaced by a dingy cot in a large drab-colored tent. The air felt dusty, as uncomfortable as she felt with the dust sticking to her sweat-moistened forehead. It was a relief to escape the vision she had seen. She felt a terrible sadness as she thought of the man that had rushed to meet his doom, and her inability to help him. She wondered what had been meant when he had told her she had all the time in the world. Suddenly she realized she was giving a lot of thought to a dream that might be completely meaningless. She tried to shake the image of Drew and her own look of horror from her mind. It had been so vivid. It lingered in her memory clearly. She did not know what any of it meant, or why she was here. "No, I don't think so, Doctor," said Jennifer at last. "I just need some more rest. Thank you for watching over me." She wiped her brow with the back of her arm. She forced a smile, but her mind desperately raced, thinking about what she had seen. The fact that she had been rescued from slavery and that these people had showed her kindness, even when she had done nothing to help them, became insignificant in her mind to the vision that she began to believe was a memory. She knew the man she had seen. She knew what enemy he had rushed to face. She had seen him too. She knew it by the name Abaddon, but everyone else had come to know it as the destroyer that had single-handedly put an end to civilization.